Everybody makes mistakes when typing code. Even experts do. Just a minor typing error can result in a rash of ugly error messages like this. Unfortunately, PHP error messages aren't exactly the most user-friendly for beginners, and seeing something like this can easily inspire fear. But to borrow some advice from the front cover of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. This chapter is devoted to helping you understand some of the most common error messages and fixing the problem. The big difference between static web pages and ones generated with PHP is that if you make a mistake in HTML or CSS, the browser will usually try to render your page. In fact, browsers are so good at dealing with errors, you often don't notice the error until you submit your page to a validator. With PHP errors, though, the browser often doesn't get a chance. You might even end up with a blank page. And believe it or not, all these error messages were caused by a single misspelling of a file name. Let's switch to my editing program, and here it is. There on line 2, there's no W in copyright. Get rid of that, save the page, and reload. The errors have all gone away. So each video in this chapter has a title that should make it easy for you to find the solution that you need. A common situation that completely baffles many PHP beginners is that they're faced with a completely blank screen like this after loading their page into a browser. When I say it's blank, it really is. If I right-click and view page source, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, no HTML, nothing at all. This happens when display errors is turned off in the PHP configuration and there's a problem with the code in the file. It's an issue that many beginners run into if they decide to use their remote server for testing. Many hosting companies turn off display errors as a security measure because error messages can reveal information that could be useful to an attacker. To emulate this situation, I've had to make a little adjustment to my testing environment. So let's go to my editing program. And in the chapter 8.08_02 folder of the exercise files, I've created this file, .htaccess. And if we open that, this is for an Apache server and it turns off the display of errors. So if you're using Apache as your testing server, you'll probably see the same effect if you load this file, blank.php, into a browser. Now, not all Apache servers are configured to support htaccess, so if you don't get a blank page, just sit back and watch the rest of this video. Another scenario is that you get an empty page, but it seems as though there's something there, and there's an example of that here in truncated.php. Let's load that into a browser. And it does seem as though something is going on because the page's background color has been rendered. And if we view page source, we can see that there is actually some HTML in there, but everything comes to a halt after the first div tag. This often happens after you've tested a page carefully in your local testing environment, but it breaks when you upload it to your live website. When faced with either situation, you need to turn on the display of error messages temporarily. You can do that easily by adding a single line of code at the start of the file. So let's go back to the editing program and then in truncated.php above the doc type, add in a PHP block, and then in there we need to call the ini_set function. And this will set a PHP configuration directive. The first argument, which needs to be a string, is the directive. That's display_errors. And the second argument is a string containing the value 1. And if we copy that little command there and go to blank.php and put it right at the very top, save both of those files, then if we go back to the browser to blank PHP, it's still blank. This happens when you've got a syntax error in your code. Even though you've turned on display errors at the beginning of the file, a syntax error anywhere in the file will prevent anything from being displayed. The only solution in this case is to try to fix the syntax error by studying the code or by using a local testing server with display errors turned on. But if we go to the other page, it's this one here, partially rendered page, and reload it in the browser, this time we get some useful error messages. They tell us that require includes menu.php, no such file or directory. Well, if we go back to the editing program, we can see that here we are in truncated.php. We're including menu.php, but we don't even have an includes folder in the exercise files. But if this happens with a file that you've tested locally, it probably means that what has happened is you've forgotten to upload the include file, or that you've stored it in the wrong place. So remember, if you get a blank page or one that's inexplicably truncated, it means that display errors is turned off on your server. This is good for security, but it makes troubleshooting difficult. You can turn on display errors temporarily in a file using ini_set and passing it two strings as arguments, display_errors as the first argument and 1 as the second argument, both of them in quotes. If you still get a blank page, it means that you've got an error in your PHP syntax. But if your syntax is okay, you'll get one or more error messages that will help you troubleshoot the problem. And when you fix the error, don't forget to remove the line of code that turns on display errors. Error messages not only look bad in a live website, they also expose information potentially useful to an attacker. In your early days of working with PHP, you'll probably come across parse or syntax errors more often than any other type of problem. Let's start by fixing the error in blank.php from the previous video. I've copied the file into the chapter 8 08_03 folder of the exercise files. Display errors isn't turned off in this folder, so let's load this file into a browser to see if we get an error message. And there is the error message. It confirms that it's a parse error, a syntax error. Unexpected slartibartfast, expecting a closing square bracket in this file on line 2. Well, I suppose slartibartfast would always be a bit unexpected, but let's go back to the editing program to see what we can do. So there we are on line 2, and there is slartibartfast. And actually, after slartibartfast, there is a closing square bracket. But this being unexpected indicates that the problem lies before slartibartfast. And if we go back a little bit, indeed, there we are. There is a missing closing quote after Marvin. And as soon as I put in that missing quote, my editing program changes color. It's indicating that it's a lot happier with the syntax of this file. So let's save that and reload it in the browser, and everything is now working. So let's take a look at some other problems. Go back to the editing program, and I'm going to open parse_01.php, which you can also find in the exercise files for this video. Let's load this into a browser and see what the error message is. Again, it's a parse error, syntax error, unexpected closing curly brace, expecting a comma or a semicolon in this file on line 20. So let's go back to the editing program, and there is line 20, and we do in fact have a closing curly brace, but that was what was unexpected. Now normally you would think that if PHP says the problem is on line 20, that's where to look. It's not usually the case. Normally what PHP will do is it will tell you that something was unexpected. In other words, something is missing before that point. That's where the error lies. And if we go back and look here on the previous line, there's no semicolon at the end of that PHP command, echo. So if we put the semicolon in there, save, and then reload the page in the browser, everything works fine. Missing out the semicolon at the end of a line is probably one of the most common beginner mistakes in PHP. It's important to remember that the semicolon is mandatory in PHP. It's not like JavaScript, where you can leave it out. So we've fixed that problem. Let's go back to the editing program and move to this other file, parse_02.php, and let's load this one into a browser. Again, it's a parse error and unexpected end of file on line 22. Let's go and have a look at that. And line 22 isn't even PHP, it's the closing HTML tag. What this means is that something is missing from the PHP code, and the PHP engine has gone all the way down to the end of the page trying to find it. When you get this error, it almost certainly means a closing curly brace is missing. And in fact, there's only one pair of curly braces on this page. It's here in the for each loop that begins on line 16, and I've missed out the closing curly brace. So if we put the closing curly brace in there and then save, reload in the browser, everything works fine. So parse errors are a major headache for beginners. That's why it's a good idea to choose a script editor that highlights syntax errors for you. I'm using a paid-for script editor, but even free ones will usually pick up syntax errors if they support PHP. The point to remember about parse errors is that the error is rarely on the same line as the one indicated in the PHP error message. The line number tells you where something unexpected was found. Forgetting the semicolon at the end of a PHP statement is one of the most common causes of parse errors. Also look out for any punctuation, such as curly braces, brackets, parentheses and quotes. They should all be in pairs. If you don't have a matching pair, you'll get a parse error. At first glance, this error message appears to be one of the most unhelpful in PHP. It says there's a parse error, syntax error, unexpected double quote, then this T in caps and white space, expecting identifier T string or variable T variable or number T num string in this file on line 17. Oh my goodness. Well, fortunately, in my experience, this T in caps and white space normally means only one thing. It means you've embedded an associative array element in a double quoted string. And it says that the problem is on line 17. So let's take a look at the code. And this is in caps.php, which you can find in the chapter 8, 08_04 folder of the exercise files. And here is line 17, and this is the double quoted string. And if we go all the way to the end of it, there is the associative array element that's been embedded in it. To get rid of this problem, we need to wrap the associative array element in a pair of curly braces. So just before the $sign, we need to have an opening curly brace, and then after the closing square bracket, a closing curly brace. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, oh, we've got another parse error. This time it says unexpected descriptions T variable in that file on line 18. So that's the next line. PHP is capable of reporting only one error at a time, so it's a good idea to test your scripts as you build them, rather than waiting right till the end and then maybe having to work through dozens of lines to eliminate errors. So let's go back to the editing program, and here is line 18, and I see that I've got something highlighted here. Let's just see that. Undefined constant EHCO. Ah, that's useful. I've misspelled echo, so let's just correct that. And that highlighting goes away. This is one of the great values of having a script editor that highlights syntax errors as you type. So let's just save that and then reload the page in the browser. And everything is now working fine. So let's go back and take a look at the code again. This example on line 17 admittedly is a bit of a contrived example. The static text would be more appropriate in the HTML, as I've done on the following line, line 18. But I deliberately did it this way to demonstrate the need for curly braces around associative array elements in a double quoted string. But don't be tempted to try to make the code more readable by inserting a space after the opening curly brace. Let's see what happens if I do. Immediately my editing program gives this red wavy line. That indicates a syntax error, but let's just save that and go back to see what error message we get in the browser. And it's the same one as before. It's the unexpected quote, T in caps and white space. So you can't have that space. So let's go back and get rid of it. This is one of the few occasions where PHP does not ignore white space in code. So if you get a parse error that refers to T in caps and white space, it almost certainly means you've embedded an associative array element in a double-quoted string. To eliminate the error, enclose the array element in curly braces, making sure there's no space between the opening brace and the $sign of the variable.